All right, very good. Hey, Emily, thank you for being here. Welcome back.
Thank
It's a real pleasure to have you back. We've been doing
thank you.
some behind the scenes planning for our conversation today, so we know where kind of we want to go. So thank you again. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. And yes, we've been doing some behind the scenes conspiring, right? We've been conspiring as to what we're going to talk about, right? Yeah, no, thank you, Rafa. It's nice to be back. I enjoyed our previous conversation and I'm looking forward to chatting with you again today.
Cool, cool. Thank you very much. Um, so Emily, I know you talk a lot about. I like the way you explore the subjects that you explore in your shows, because it's kind of you tend to call it the alternative media, and many times the alternative media can get into conspiracies, and many times the different perspectives on conspiracies can get a little bit disempowering or even paranoid. And I like that you are able to hold ideas and not like get married to potential consequences, but just look at those ideas. Maybe we have some astrological things in common that allow us to think similarly, because
Mm-hmm.
I recognize myself in those kind of reasonings, and that's why I'm really interested in speaking with you, because I connect very much with the way you think. So
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know if I gave any opening for you
Yeah.
to share
So,
something here.
well, I think first of all, like I've shown no sign of concern about consequences in most of my behavior in life. So why would I think about it now necessarily? But I think maybe it's just a function of my personality type, mostly overall, that like I like to have a good time. So for me, like, and also my mind is very active. It likes to consume information. It likes to analyze things. I like to try and understand what is going on. And obviously, like the state of our world is pretty chaotic and there's a lot of crazy shit going on. But, one of the places that I've come to, and I didn't always feel this way because there was a period of time when I was not being honest with myself as a human. I was not in alignment with what I thought the right way to live was. And when I was out of alignment, then all of these things that we're looking at felt very upsetting to me, right? They felt very like something has to be done. Somebody has to fix this. And until this is all fixed, I cannot possibly go on and have a meaningful life or function like a normal human being. Like I just am going to have to stay here in my room and continue being self-destructive and doing drugs until somebody does something.
The perfect excuse. Somebody else has to fix this. Yeah.
Somebody else has to fix it, or I can't be okay until everyone wakes up. I know everything. Nobody else knows anything. And until they know something, I can't do whatever amazing thing I've been sent here, whatever to do, all that fucking bullshit. Right. And so, at a certain point though, like, because, I'm not a dum-dum. I recognize, well, shit, I've been waiting a long time for that to happen and it's not happening and I'm starting to get bored. Right. And that's the biggest thing for me. I can't stand to be bored. So the only option was, okay, well, I've tried this other way that I know doesn't work for like a long time now, right? And I've been really committed to it and not strayed from at all from what my theory about how that should go, and it hasn't worked. So I'm just going to play with the other thing for a little bit and see what happens if instead of waiting for everything else to change, I start doing things to change myself. And very quickly, like, I'm not saying, when I say very quickly, that doesn't imply that it was easy, because some of it was like hard work and uncomfortable, but fairly quickly that alignment started to come into focus and I was able to sort of get to this space where, okay, I'm doing what I believe is the right thing to do, and I'm working on myself and I'm developing myself. And one of the side effects of it, which I don't know if I expected it or was going for this, was that I started to become equally, if not more so, amused by the situation in the world as I was disappointed in it or upset or outraged or whatever. And so I think that, like, the quality in me that you're speaking of is that I'm kind of balanced right there. I'm kind of sitting on the wall and, able to get in touch with the parts of this that are like immoral and outrageous, but also laugh at the humor in it, recognize our role in it, see how in some ways, like, is it possible that we're even generating some of this ourselves as some sort of like lesson to be learned or hurdle to be overcome in our overall development in the long picture, not just in this short little part of one life that we're in right now. And so for me, or it could also just be like I like to have a good time, right? And so for me, anything that is, I don't have to have a good time all the time, but I do. Like I always say to people, like I don't have very many laws I live by, but the few laws are that everything must be yummy. I like good food, and I must have some fun every day. And if you know what I mean, and so that implies, like, even if the fun is laughing at myself or laughing at the people around me or whatever, like that is more my nature to want to play with things. And I think it actually makes me a better analyst of information than someone who is upset by everything, right? Because when you're upset by something, you're constantly looking for something on the other side that is going to make you feel better. But when you find something entertaining or amusing, you're more likely to keep at it in a way that is playful in nature and that other people can sort of lock onto because, oh, that looks like fun, right? It's you usually want to join in on things that are, seem like they're moving forward or that they're joyful. We've had this weird thing in our culture where for a long time, like misery was celebrated, right? But I think that's wearing thin for a lot of people at this point. And it certainly was for me. And so the way I approach things are like, if it, not that I have to be delighted with everything all the time. Something can be upsetting to me, but if I spend more time being upset about it than I do being entertained by it, then maybe it's time to start doing something else. So
yeah, it's probably time to start relaxing. And you mentioned the inner work that you started doing. You're taking that other path instead of waiting for the world to change, to start changing what you can from within. And that's I've come to the realization that is the hardest work that there is, and that in fact it's so hard that we find it easier to be miserable, to be depressed, to be paranoid, to think that the world is out to get us, that there is nothing we can do, and that everything is worse every day and worse every year, and it's so self-defeating that it needs to come sometimes to a point where the world kicks your butt and you realize, oh shit, okay, I can start doing some inner work.
Yeah.
Sometimes people require a very traumatic situation. Others are lucky enough to have a kind of like a kind of harmonizing thing within them that lends them to start on their own exploring some inner work.
In my experience, maybe there's a few exceptions of people I know, but generally, like, when the real work begins for yourself is when you've been completely kicked out of the normal world, when you've either gotten your butt kicked or whatever it is, right? When you've just gotten so far away from, so isolated and so far away from all the, like, the juice of life, the energy of life, that like you're really like, there's not a lot of other options. You have to start working on yourself. And one of the things, and this is like working on yourself, like, sure, occasionally things will come along where like you can find a friend that is like, oh, it's good, we work on ourselves together, or even your romantic partner or whatever. That's usually the best kind of partner to choose for yourself, is the one who is constantly working on themselves and you're working on yourself, so there can be some coming together of it. But this is an inside job. This is something you have to do by yourself. The hardest work comes on yourself, by yourself. It is not, and this goes to some of what we're experiencing right now. We're seeing a lot of people participating in movements of one form or another, which, for those of us who pay attention to the alternative media, that's been going on for a long time, with your like, truth movement, your, like anti-chemtrail activists, your GMO things and all that kind of stuff. But one of the things that I've noticed is, like, when you join up with a movement, it just becomes a better excuse to not work on yourself, because you're putting all of your energy into working on somebody else with someone else, right? And so like for me, this issue that people think that all of these movements, whatever, I mean, really it's like one issue, but there's many varieties of it. But all of these movements against something. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? It's delaying. If all the people who are part of this activism took time to go within themselves, really examine themselves, and start doing the work that will pull them into alignment with what they actually like believe about the world and that they're living within that, you don't need the big movements. People who are like well in alignment with themselves will not tolerate the kind of crap that leads to the so-called need for these kinds of movements, right? And so if everybody works on themselves, then we don't have to yell in the street together, you know? So
yeah, many times that I agree totally that need to go and have something in the outside change is generally an escape from something that you want to change within yourself. And in fact, it's like you said, and like I was mentioning, it's the hardest work that there is in our life. And there's this quote by Ken Wilber, whom I've stumbled upon a few months or a year ago, and it's super interesting. And he says that when maybe kind of out of context I'm taking it, but kind of like when you're doing this inner work and you're developing your compassion and all of that, he uses a phrase that says, hurts you more, bothers you less, something like that. I think it's and that's like hitting it in the nail in the head, because it's not that you do that inner work because you're selfish and you want to, okay, fuck the world, I'm going to only focus on myself. You actually focus on expanding your heart and embracing all that is, rather than doing things outside of you to stop to cover the sun with your finger. And right? And as you start opening your heart, you're able to you feel everything, you feel it even more, like the phrase says, but you also develop a kind of resilience, a kind of acceptance of, okay, so yeah, the world is fucked up. There are many things that are unjust or inequality or whatever, but it's not something that I'm going to change from today to tomorrow, or even in the course of months or years by going outside and complaining about it. It's something that starts within me, how I treat myself, becoming more aware of my own thoughts, how I criticize my own self, then how I treat those around me, how I am with my partner, how I am with my neighbors, and even the people that I cross in the street. Perhaps I cross somebody and immediately comes a criticism in my head, and I'm like constantly like that, and starting to look at those things. And so one of the main techniques that helped me comes from Ramdas, which is the idea of observing yourself, becoming more identified with the observer than with the doer of the things. So that way you learn to get some distance from whatever is happening and to not get pulled so much. And well, there's other techniques that can be even simpler, which is stop watching TV, stop listening to the radio and reading the newspapers, and stop consuming all that disempowering information, which in fact we don't know what the people behind that, what their actual agendas are, even if without any evil or without any conspiracies. Maybe those people just get money from certain advertisers, which give them money when they say this and don't give them money when they say that. So and those and perhaps even the advertisers, they want the newspaper or whatever to say this, not again because of a conspiracy, but because when the newspaper says this, they sell more product. So in a way we can say that there is a conspiracy behind the world, because or like I was saying just now, there isn't the need for a conspiracy, but at the same time it's evident that there are certain perhaps families, certain philosophies that have existed for thousands and thousands of years, and within those there are some that have existed perhaps at the top of of the
Hmm.
economic pyramid, perhaps, or of the power pyramid, or the influence pyramid. So it makes sense that there are conspiracies, because those people will also have their own agendas of, okay, so I want to continue being the most powerful family
Hmm.
or person or whatever. So understanding and working on yourself allows you to look at all these pieces and not despair and not become, oh my God, what am I going to do? The world is so crazy. It's still crazy, but you're not overwhelmed by the fact that it is.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to address a couple of things. I want to address the observer thing, and then the thing about the conspiracy, but then also about not becoming overwhelmed. Like working on yourself is enough. If you're honestly working on yourself, you have very little time to worry about what's going on out there, right? And the benefit of the upside of working on yourself is then once you've resolved an issue within yourself, you now have a template or a model for resolving an issue outside of yourself. And so, like for me, in a lot of the work I do, because I put out all this media stuff, I analyze what's going on in the outer world and whatever, but I'm also a nutrition consultant and I deal with what's going on inside of the body. And the inner world works very much like the outer world, like the systems of our body in terms of like keeping things in balance and not letting one thing overtake another is very similar to what goes on in the outer world. And once you've experimented and had success controlling the environment of your own body, then you are more well prepared to make a change in the outer world if it's appropriate. And also one of the things after you've worked on yourself, you have a much better like ability to assess, you know what, maybe that is just not my fight. That is not my issue. That is not my problem, or that is not necessarily something that needs changing by me and maybe at all, right? Like the idea that like we're all just here to change the world, like that's something that came from basically an academic a takeover of the academic system. The university used to be a place where you went to learn about the world, and now it's a place that you go to change the world. And that shift really started happening around the time we ever experienced the first school shooting, which was back in the University of Texas, way back, half a century ago and whatever. Like the university is to learn about the world, not to change the world. So people's perception of what we're doing here has been shifted over this period of time. And it doesn't mean that there aren't things about the world that needs to change, but that isn't what we're here for necessarily. We're here to like have this vast experience and learn from it all. And maybe there's some things that need changing or whatever. But once you've kind of done the holistic work on yourself, it's really clear what those things are. And they're probably fewer, right? They're fewer, but more major in some ways. So I wanted to say what you said about the observer, right? Like about when you said you would learn this from Ram Dass or whatever. And, but being the observer of yourself and your own life is really good for being honest with yourself and critiquing and working on yourself. But the balance for that, going back to our earlier part of the conversation about how to be with some of this stuff, is also being able to laugh at yourself, right? Like I remember when I first started becoming really good at observing myself was through use of psychedelics. Like I remember like the first couple of times I ever did acid, it was like, whoa, like I can observe myself and then I can observe myself observing myself. And one of the things that I noticed was like, I was really silly. Like I did a lot of really funny stuff. And like, you have certain things that just like in any cartoon, that character always does that. And well, people are like that too, right? And it's funny and it helps you to become more like, being able to laugh at yourself is like crucial in this thing because, once you identify the fact that, oh, in this given situation, I will always do this same thing. It's part of getting to know yourself, but it's also part of like, okay, like that's funny and I do it in this way that is humorous and doesn't really matter. But what other areas of my life do I do that in where it's maybe also causing me harm? So it's a painless entry into an area where you can do serious work, right? So learning to laugh at yourself can be therapeutic for multiple reasons, including an easy invitation into looking at the darker aspects of yourself that also maybe need some shifting. And then to what you said about the conspiracy. So I used to say that there weren't all these, well, when I first started looking at stuff, I thought, oh my God, there's all these conspiracies. And then I had the realization that there was really just one conspiracy. And I used to say it's a conspiracy against allowing you to decide for yourself what your future will be. Right? Like there, and I was saying that in relation to like the apparent elite or control system's monopoly on energy, right? And on power, in terms of, not even so much in terms of political power, but in terms of like actual energy, the suppression of free energy technology, right? And that if people had access to what we all know is there from what we've learned from Tesla and things like that, then they would be a lot easier, a lot harder to control politically, right? But the reason people are able to be controlled politically is because they need access to certain things like energy, right? Like electricity, like this and that requires you to be on a grid and play a certain game. So I had said that was the conspiracy, to keep people from being able to decide for themselves what their future will be. And now what I will say about it, it's shifted a little for me recently in watching all the things that are going on. And what you said about these powerful families and the advertisers and things. Where the conspiracy really is for your attention. It's for your attention. Everybody has a narrative. Everybody has a story they're telling about the world and humanity and their role in it, right? And what should happen in the story. And if they can get you to pay more attention to their story than you're paying to working on developing your own narrative or your own story or your own pathway for your own life, then that's the win, right? So it isn't just about actual energy in terms of like electricity or power that way, but it's also in terms of energy. Human attention is the new economy. It's the current economy. And wherever your attention goes, that narrative grows, right? And so, if you're spending more time analyzing someone else's story than creating your own, right, then that's where it's at. That's what they're trying to do with all of this, with advertising, with what we see playing out in the news, with the fear of the virus, with the protests or whatever. They're trying to get you to buy into one of their narratives instead of constructing your own.
Yeah, definitely. Emily, everything that you're saying, there's so much in there. And I mean, I would like to go a million different ways from here because first, I'm looking at some notes because you're very good. You remembered perfectly what you wanted to say. I needed to write it down. About the laughing at oneself. You said when you were speaking a while ago, you said you mentioned the word amuse, to be amused, and that reminded me of another phrase that says, "The angels fly because they take themselves lightly," and
Yep.
that's beautiful also to learn to laugh at yourself, not just to be the witness and the observer and fall in the trap of being the the victim observer of, oh my god, I'm doing everything wrong. No, it's
Yep.
looking at your patterns and just accepting them, and by accepting them they start to dissolve naturally if they need to. It's a pretty paradoxical way of working on yourself, because we always think of work, do, but this is just becoming aware of stuff that we are unaware, like what happened during your psychedelic trips.
Yeah.
Learning to see something that you're already doing and you don't realize, and learning
Yeah.
to see that pattern. And something else, oh yeah, about this conspiracy for the attention. Um, we well that I can leave for the third thing. My second thing was, there's this book. I don't want to be the guy that recommends books, because we all have like a million half
No,
started
recommend
books.
books. I've been doing it a lot lately. Recommend books. Yeah.
So there's this book by Alan Watts, which is called, and you reminded me of it. It's called The Book, and the subtitle is On the Taboo of Knowing Who You Really Are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's we could change there on the conspiracy against knowing who you really are, because
Yeah, absolutely.
it connects to the other part of the human attention, because who we are in reality is so powerful, and it's the ground of being. It's the it's I mean, I fight, I am no not fight I am I struggle to find the word, because I want to say God, but it's a very controversial word these days. But we are everything. We are the basis of everything. We are consciousness. We are awareness. And wherever we place our awareness, like you said, that narrative or that energy grows. And so if you control human attention, you control what reality that attention manifests or creates. So I've been experimenting with certain techniques for reality manifestation, or whatever we want to call it. I'm still not comfortable with that word, but and you start noticing changes, and they happen in such a way that doesn't come in conflict with your beliefs. So if you say, "Oh, I want to make lots of money," or "I want to um, uh, be able to work on my passion," and it doesn't, like, from one day to the other you're a millionaire suddenly, because it appears that because of our awareness and who we are, there are some limits to how we can manifest all of that, and there needs to be belief for it to be like smoothly happen, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's a conspiracy or a war for our attention, or let's not use those words, but there is a competition for human awareness, attention,
Yeah.
and it needs to happen slowly, because this has been going on for ages and ages, perhaps
You
since.
just said you just said something really important though, and you said it as an error, but actually it's exactly right. It's not only a competition for human attention; it's a competition for awareness, right? For like that as well. I just wanted to address real quick before you go on, because I know there's a third thing for you.
No, that was
What
the
you
third
said
thing,
about
so you can go on, you can go on.
okay, what you said about that the conspiracy is really, I like this, the conspiracy against you being able to know who you are. If people think about it, like that's been broadcast to us all along, right? Like for people who are waking up, we always hear the term down, you're going down the rabbit hole, right? And that's a reference obviously to Alice in Wonderland, right? And we could go in a million directions with Alice in Wonderland, MK Ultra programming, all this kind of stuff, but we've all seen Alice in Wonderland. We've all used the terminology going down the rabbit hole. But what's a question that's asked to her very early on her trip down the rabbit hole, and probably multiple times throughout it? I think it's the Cheshire Cat or one of the other little characters that goes, "Who are you?" Right? So she's out there trying to figure out what everyone else is doing, who everyone else is, but the answer to her, like, she has to figure out who she is. And that's the case for all of us, right? Like, we spend a lot of time figuring out who is the person that is doing this to us, and who is the shady character behind all of this or that, right? When probably we would get to the place we wanted to get quicker by examining the question of who we are, who I am. So that, and then what you were just saying, you just said the point about the awarenesses, right? Like right now in what we're experiencing in the outer world, right? It's a competition for your attention. So you're paying attention to the virus, the protests, the riots, or whatever, right? And then to the extent that you are conducting any sort of critical observation or analysis of it, you may become aware of Bill Gates or aware of George Soros, and then all your awareness goes there to the place where they're the cause of all of this, which stops you, A, from looking at other factors that are going on, right? But also right back to, like, the question is, am I even aware of who I am? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're scapegoating this on a lot of other individuals. You know what I mean? We're aware of who they are. Are we aware? Do we have that same level of awareness about ourselves? And are we living with some of the same contradictions in ourselves that we're accusing them of having? Right? Like, it's it's quite a contradiction to say, I'm going to, help the health of the world by reducing population. Right? Or with George Soros, it's like, I'm going to bring an open society and equality by destroying economies. It doesn't make sense. How many of those things, contradictions, do you have within your own self about your own life, right? And when your awareness is so directed towards that, it steals from you the opportunity of resolving those issues in yourself.
Yes, like, one of the things that seems very, very hard for us, I mean, we're talking about how aware are we of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And many times or actually not many people, ask themselves, what do I want? And if you propose that as an exercise for somebody who is like asking for help and who is ready to look at themselves, it seems like a stupid question to ask. Okay, get a pen and paper and write down 10 things of what you want. And it's a really hard exercise when you've never done it, and even like repeating it regularly to get to know yourself, the Bible, and know thyself. I mean, it's been told to us forever and forever, because the answer to that question is like the antidote for whatever is happening outside of us. Because
Antidote for chaos. Yeah.
exactly, because it seems like whatever is going on outside, we are causing it through our belief, through our attention, through our power. Like the computer is now on because there is a cable connected to it, which is connected to the source. And if we are connected to the source, or if we are the source and we are connected on the other end to a certain agenda or a certain narrative, more likely, if we're connected to that narrative, we are feeding that narrative, and it's on, like the computer is on now
all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah. You said something that was just interesting about, what was it you were talking about? Oh, I just lost my train of thought, because then I got into your computer analysis here. Oh, I just lost what I was going to say. It was kind of something interesting too. Well, maybe it will come back. Can I get it? I think I lost it. Oh, well. It happens to me once in a while. I'm usually pretty good at going back and pulling on them. But
know yourself, to know ourselves, asking, what do I want?
Oh, what I know now. I know what it is. Yes. Okay. So when you ask people what it is they want, sometimes they don't know, or they might put one or two things, but they're really very good at telling you what they don't want. Right. And so if you don't want something, then it sets up that narrative where you then have to fight it. So it's back to your analogy of covering the sun with your finger. Right. So like, like people, I mean, think of how many times a day when we're listening to videos or the whatever, like we hear people talking about the thing that's wrong or the thing that they don't want, right? Or we have to stop this person from doing this. We need to expose this. We need to resist that, but not the question, what do you want? What are you going to do? Or even when it's, what do you want? Sometimes you'll get an answer like, I want this person to stop doing this. No, that's what do you want for yourself? Like, what are you going to do? We've gotten into this thing of where we're constantly just, even our wants have become just reactions to other people's doings, as opposed to something we're generating. Yeah.
War on this, the war on that, the war on the other.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like all of these, like hashtag expose so-and-so, hashtag resist this and that, hashtag fight the new world order, all this kind of stuff. And I'm not trying to get silly with it. Like I understand sometimes it's just, like there's a certain element of that you need for a kind of a balance. But if the thing you're resisting is taking more energy than the thing that you are for, or the thing that you are trying to create, it goes back to that same balance. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're going to stay in that loop of fighting that thing because you're perhaps not even aware of what it
has to keep happening. The thing has to keep happening so you will continue to have something to do, because humans always need something to do, right? That's part of our nature. That's actually probably one of our shortcomings. It's nice to just sometimes sit back and do nothing and be okay doing nothing, right? But just think about, if all of the problems of the world were solved tomorrow, the alternative media would have a serious shortage of things to do. I look forward to that day, but absolutely.
I'm also thinking about something that you mentioned and I lost it. Just now you were saying something very interesting as well, and I lost it. Yeah.
Well, just about that you have to have something, like the having something to resist creates something to do. So if we didn't have, like if we didn't have all these things to fight, then you'd be stuck having to figure out for yourself what to do. So it's a really good way, part of this tactic also, of not ever of competing, trying to steal someone's attention so they never get to the point of asking themselves the ultimate question, who am I? Right? Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't know oh yeah, I kind of remembered. When working with, or when you're researching the stuff about manifestation and creating or co-creating reality and realizing your dreams and your passions. One of the things you need to be aware of is not to be, oh, I want this, I want that, because in that case you're like you're creating the want of that. You know what I mean? Similar to what you're saying of, I don't want war, I don't want the conspiracies, I don't want whatever. You're creating that opponent so that you can always be in that mode of chasing the after the carrot or something like that.
Yeah.
Instead, find out what you want and be that. And it's
Yeah.
it sounds so woo-woo to say be the thing you want to
Yeah.
to experience, but start with your feelings, start with your emotions. Imagine what it would be like if you were if your life was the way you wanted it right now, and not just imagine what it would be like, but imagine that it is like that right now.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
well, there's a million different ways of exploring all of that, but I think it's perhaps stuff for another day, for another conversation maybe.
Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely.
Huh? You want to add something about that?
No, it's just, this actually just came up in a show that I did with Michael Wan, but the horizon is it's an Albert Einstein quote. The horizon is just an imaginary line in the distance that recedes as you approach it. So any of this can go for things in our whole life. When we say something like, well, in the future, or when this finally occurs, then this will occur, it keeps it from happening. It keeps it receding and moving farther away as you approach it and whatnot. So it's just like, find joy in your life now, not, when I get this thing, I want this, and once I have this, then I'll be happy. You have to happiness now. There's something that you can do every single day in your life that will bring you some degree of joy, and joy is not dependent on the thing that you're trying to manifest or create in the future, right? That, like, the joy is part of that manifestation. So yeah.
Sometimes the fear of the changes that we imagine would need to happen for that to become real, that fear sometimes stops us or makes us second guess ourselves, and we don't do the thing that we want to do.
Yep.
Out of fear of how much different I would my I of the future would be of the I that I am today.
Yep.
The difference would be so big that I don't dare to even give the first step towards that, because oh my god, that ego death, that death of who I think I am right
Yep.
now. Yeah. And
Yep.
let me see, I don't know how much time we've got, but there was something else that we talked
Yes,
about.
you had a list of things you wanted to get to, so let's get to those things.
No, but these conversations are best when we just
Yeah.
let go and allow for anything to come to us that,
Yeah.
that the energy of the moment needs to express. So I'm really happy to just go anywhere. I always talk like this and I sometimes get people kind of annoyed because I can go through tangent and whatever we were talking at the start, I don't know. But if you want, we can. It's a bit connected with the ideas of. So this was all like a kind of an introduction to all this other stuff that we might explore today.
Yeah.
Um, so in order for people not to look at conspiracies, to not look at conspiracies with the eyes of paranoia or the eyes of victim, or that there is nothing that we can do, but more with a curious mind, with interested in learning more about that, because learning about that is learning about ourselves, in the way that we project and we create the world outside us. It's very much a reflection of how we and who of how we are inside. Like something that they say, for example, is that every country gets the president they deserve, right? Or every people gets the leader they deserve. What does that mean? I think it means if, if like if people want to complain about the state of, for example, their country or whatever, they're going to get a president that shows more of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly, how we got Donald Trump.
yeah, I don't want to get political because it gets people very riled up, and And actually, I haven't been like into since I started my own personal journey of self development and of knowing myself and etc. I've tried. I haven't been watching TV for many years. I haven't been following politics, but of course you get information because there's no way of escaping that today. But so people shouldn't be looking at, in my opinion, shouldn't be looking at conspiracies and all of that stuff with fear, but actually with curiosity. So with that kind of perspective or with that kind of filter, we could talk a bit about some of the conspiracies that are around the world and how they connect with the idea of mysticism, with the idea of a hidden world, an invisible world, perhaps the spiritual realm, or magic and stuff like that. Because I believe that what we were speaking before is pretty esoteric. You know, that we are creating reality, or that if we are focusing on the problem, we are feeding it with our energy, and that there is a competition for human attention. That means that human attention, which is something very intangible, is actually um, at the basis or behind the material world and the events that happen here in this 3D world. So it's pretty clear to me that people in power and governments have been exploring ways to connect both worlds, and perhaps sometimes with as there will probably be people doing it for the right reasons, there are probably people doing it for the wrong reasons, just like anything. It's like the idea of a tool. It's neutral. It's just on how you use it. So not to go too extended on this rant, but what can you tell me, or can you tell us about stuff that's perhaps going on behind the scenes, or that you've researched, or perhaps even something that you might have experienced in your own life?
Yeah. So first of all, when you were talking, I was thinking about, and I haven't read the book, but uh, I should, because it pops to mind a lot. When I was at Danny Katz's house one time, she has a book that's called Pronoia, right? Like the opposite of paranoia, pronoia. And the book sort of like sets out not only to prove that the idea that the world is an evil place out to get you is not only raw, boring, but it's wrong, and it's boring and it's wrong, right? And there is a time when I would have had maybe a problem with that. But from what I've like, and it's weird to be here sometimes in this, I always want to be careful and sensitive, because there was a time when I felt like the world was against me, and that there was not only the major world conspiracies, but there was individuals targeting me, mind controlling me, like trying to, like stop, like that we're doing these things to me. And it's not that isn't true, right? So when I say this, I'm not sitting here denying that there is any truth to that, because like I was in that spot until I wasn't in that spot anymore. And so I have a level of sensitivity and compassion, actually like a large amount of it, for people who are still in that space. But as I've moved to the place where it's more like, and how I moved to it was through sort of just accepting responsibility for my life regardless of that, right? Like whether or not that's happening, if I'm having a problem, I need to take responsibility for it. And it's not doing me any good to, say it's this other stuff. So it was almost like I pretended until I got it, right? And then, the ability, so part of it is just a mind switch, right? Like that humans need to have their attention compete. There needs to be a competition for human attention, like you said. Okay, there's obviously something important about human attention, right? Obviously, attention, where attention, goes, energy flows, and then things are created. So part of overcoming this issue that a lot of us have found ourselves in individually, and we find ourselves in collectively, is sort of switching like the perception of the same activity from I'm being attacked or I'm being targeted to, what is it about me that they find so interesting, right? And what is it, like, I do feel like there's a thing where it's like, there are people, and some of them may be dark-handed, and some of them, for a more positive or neutral light, where it is kind of like they see it as their duty, their responsibility, their work to sort of try and move people in the direction of becoming aware of who they are and the power that they have, right? And the farther we get from knowing who we are and the powers that we have, the more overt they need to be in pushing that along, right? And this does not excuse the behavior. Like, I do believe that, if we're living in any kind of, to claim that a world in any way is like just or moral, then people should be aware of what's happening and why, and that kind of thing. But it does seem that, like, so when you switch your perspective from these people are following me and making my life miserable, they're setting me up for some kind of thing, or they're whatever, to, wow, I must be pretty interesting for like somebody to feel the need to hire 6 people to follow me around all day, right? Or to do, or whatever it is. And you start to tap into it, like, what is interesting about me? You mentioned when we talked before we started recording here about, projects and programs, and I'm doing this new series with Michael Wan called Project Kids, where we, are kind of exploring some of this stuff from the perspective of, like, what is there here to play with and work with, as opposed to, we better expose this shit, right? Like, the exposing time is over. Like, that is largely like old news. And when I say that, I don't mean that, like, there's been people who have majorly sacrificed their personal life to show people something about what's happening with the world. And we needed that, and we need them. And it's important to honor and respect that. But to just help move us from this place of just looking at the problem to, like, playing with the solution or playing with the possibilities, we're choosing to take that perspective. And you mentioned something. You mentioned, Terry, like military abductions, right? Or projects. And we hear a lot of people talk about, like, the targeting of individuals. And I would say, so, like, the military abduction, like the kind of classic thing that I view it as, is like a child generally, but sometimes an adult, but usually it starts in childhood and they think it continues, feels that, like, they have had some sort of experience where they were abducted by something, by an alien maybe, or I'm sure there's some cases where it's not necessarily an alien, but this is the classic, right? Like, people think they've been abducted by an alien, but at some point during this experience, there is something fairly military about it. They find themselves in some sort of military base or whatever, or they find themselves in some sort of unusual medical situation where they're being tested, right? And then suddenly, somehow, generally back in their bed or dropped off somewhere, not right at, but in proximity to their home. Sometimes it's different than that. And that, it's a confusing experience, the aliens, the whatever, the military. And that over time, people through research came to the conclusion that no, what was probably happening was that the military was abducting people, right? And sort of creating some sort of false or screen memory that there was an alien involved. Or sometimes it really is just a creation of the imagination, where a person, it's easier to believe that someone who is inflicting harm or terror on you can't be human, so they must be something else, right? Like, if your uncle is, molesting you, there's something easier about believing that there's an alien doing a probe than that your uncle is molesting you, right? So a little kid's mind might go there. But there does seem to be a lot of evidence that the military was conducting a lot of testing on people, oftentimes children of people in the military, or people who, people they were interested in. And so my question, I guess, and maybe this is just more my natural state of being, is not like they're trying to do something to hurt me as much as, like, They're obviously very curious about something here. Why would that be? Especially, why would they be doing this to young children? Like, and I think there's a game at foot here that is much more vast than just what's happening right now in this lifetime. And that is that people in these positions of power, and when I say power, I don't mean people in government, although there can be crossover there. I'm talking about people who really have a high level of knowing and understanding about how realities work, multiple realities work, and how we exist throughout time or no time over many planes that are all right here on top of each other, available at separate frequencies, right? And so one of the features of this one that we find ourselves having a collective or shared experience in is that time appears to be linear. Like there's a start to something, it flows in one direction, and whatnot. And so we think of like everything as like, oh, our past lives, or maybe the one in the future, when it really could just be a concurrent now. And I think there's an awareness with for some of these people that, like, some of us, souls, spirits, people, whatever, have been very powerful in other times or other realms, depending on how you view it, like if it's linear or if it's just stacked on top of each other. And when you come into a new space, is this person aware of all the things from the other spaces or the other times or whatnot? And, a lot of this is done through frequency and through, it isn't just like, okay, a genetic program because you're related to this person. It's that there's a certain frequency or a certain sort of like geometric signature or pattern that a person's genetics may carry that like indicated who this person was in another space or another time. And they're very curious to understand, I think, what the person knows or remembers from these other spaces. And that's kind of what they're checking for, right? How aware, I think, is this person of the big question we talked about earlier, who they really are, what they really are, how vast is their awareness? Does it just extend to the period of time that they've been here linearly, or does it extend to these other realities, these other dimensions, these prior times, these future times? And I think that's what's really being looked for. Like they want to know, just like anything else. Like when you were little and your parents had bought the Christmas present and they already knew what it was and you didn't know yet, you wanted to know. You wanted, right? Like you wanted to you wanted to know what that was because they knew and you didn't, right? And so what's even more curious than that is when you don't know if the person knows or not, right? Like let's say you're a husband that's cheated on with the wife. You're doing all this weird stuff then to try and figure out, if the wife knows that you've been cheating. You have, you know what I mean? You're doing weird things. And so I think this leads to a lot of weird behavior, trying to figure out like, okay, well, I know this. Does this person know it? And if do they know other things that I don't know? And it's this constant competition for awareness and attention and to see who knows what. It's like on a certain level, I heard somebody once describe it, it's just like spy versus spy, right? Like everything is a test to see how much the other person knows. Do they know as much as you? Do they know more? What do they know? And, it's unfortunate, right, that like this is what's happening, but I think this is like what the game is. And I think one of the things that people in secret societies, Freemasonry, secret societies like, Skull and Bones and this kind of stuff, they somehow have figured out, and this leads into another thing that you had wanted to talk about maybe, which was that idea of immortality. I certainly think that they've figured out a technique for, on a certain level, controlling reincarnation to where they're able to, I don't know if it's that they are able to intentionally like decide who they're going to reincarnate as, put themselves into another, the next life, or wherever they reincarnate, they're able to recall all the experiences from the prior life. So I think there's some of that going on. I think every secret society or group has a different technique that they're doing. There might be a little different than the others. And I also think there's groups of people that have figured out immortality. And Robert and I were talking about this recently. And this is obviously the crux of a lot of the conversation with Sonia Barrett on an ongoing basis, is this idea of extreme life extension and evading a death program. But I think there's all sorts of ways, and some of them would be considered nefarious, like vampirism for achieving immortality. And then there's other, sort of more alchemical ways of doing it, or even ways of using technology that could be nefarious or neutral to do it. So I think this is kind of like, we're in this place where like all of this stuff is going on, right? And if your mind, for whatever reason, can't hold like that there's all of these possibilities at play here, then the default mode is to go to the one where it's like, something is happening to me. Somebody is doing something to me. And also that is probably true. So it's super complex. It's not an either or situation. But the perspective from which you choose to view your role or your experience in this incredibly complex game that's going on here, I think largely determines the quality of the experience that you have. And being able to make that shift from something's happening to me to like, I must be pretty darn interesting, and so I'm going to roll with that. Or at least this is amusing, right? Like, this isn't about like thinking I'm important and I'm going to be a god, although that's what they believe. The people in secret societies believe that we all are with the potential to be gods, that kind of thing. So you can do that without arrogance by at least being sort of amused and in a position of, well, if they can do it, so can I, so I'm going to play with this experience too. And you can make the choice to do it in a way that is not nefarious or does not offend your morals, right? You don't have to do it the way they're doing it. I said a lot of stuff now. So I hope I didn't go too far off the reservation for you.
No, that was awesome. Yeah, it's a lot of information. Where could we tease something out of that? Let me just check. So there's ideas, and there's ideas about beings from other dimensions. You were talking about multiple realities, parallel realities, universes. There's something that in science and in physics, quantum physics, perhaps they're getting towards something like that. And I think they probably, if they are ever able to demonstrate it, I don't know, but the evidence is going to continuously point more and more towards the possibility of parallel realities being something real, the multiverse, the omniverse, whatever. And so there seem to be, like in spirituality and in some spiritual traditions, there's this idea that humans have the most important place in the what you call it, in the scale perhaps of incarnations or of being, like like we are kind of in the middle of the thing. So there's higher realms with what we call as higher beings, and then there's lower realms with lower beings. And it seems, as far as I understand, humans are the only ones that have the possibility of getting enlightened, the possibility of becoming free from the cycle of death and rebirth. And so every higher being, let's say, in a way wants to incarnate in the human realm and in the human body, so as to be able to become free and return to the source. But there seems to be also a kind of another side. This is something I've been exploring or thinking about recently. Kind of what we call the bad guys or evil is like, I don't know really how to explain it, but it seems like they would be trying to destroy creation, to destroy existence so that it never existed. Something like that, like killing God in a way, killing existence. And but at the same time you mentioned this possibility of people trying to live forever through, so there's very many different like ways of playing this game. Sometimes I think of life and existence as a kind of hyperdimensional chess, with pieces moving all over, and even in places that we are not aware of. And what do you think is going on? I mean, it's a very, very large question, but I mean,
Yeah.
they probably, some people are doing these occult experiments or whatever, like experimenting to discover the possibility of human psychic abilities, right?
Mhm.
There's a possibility of certain beings from other dimensions trying to get into ours in a kind of way, bending or breaking the rules.
Mhm.
But then when they're here, it seems they want to live forever, but at the same time, it seems they might want to escape or perhaps even get enlightened or free. There's like so much going on, and at the same time, here we are being able to perceive, most of us, just the 3D world, and all of this is like crazy talk in a way. But then there's a few glimpses of synchronicities or intuitions, or sometimes you'll get a cosmic giggle, you know, a kind of
Mhm.
thing that leads you down this path rather than that, and whatever. And you internally, through your experience, you get a feeling. Okay, I kind of know that this, what I call the invisible world, is real. There is something
Mhm.
else other than the material world. Yeah, I said a lot also. I don't know what my final point of that was.
No, it's okay. I can dance around with some of that. So,
I
like,
didn't want to like burden you with the question of what's going on because it was so general that I wanted to frame it a little bit more.
so the question that, like, the answer to that question, what's going on? I have no fucking idea. Like, right? Like,
Okay.
it's as mystifying to me as it is to
Mm,
anybody else. But I love that. Like, I
yeah.
love that. That to me, that is fun, right? Like, to me, that is the great equalizer, because
Mhm.
even all these people who think they know what's going on, who are trying to control the world, who are whatever, they obviously haven't figured it out yet, because they're still wasting their time bothering me, right? Or bothering you, or, you know, trying to paint a narrative to make someone believe stuff. And once somebody knows, like, if they really had the answer, they wouldn't be bothering with all this dumb shit, right? If they really had the answer, right? The answer were like the thing we're really talking about, right? Sure, maybe they know a few more things or different things with that than we've figured out, and so they're able to easily maneuver things and get us to react to shit and whatever. But as to what you said about, like, this idea of humans, like, being, you know, like, the center of the focus, it's true. Like, there's obviously things that are not human that want to be human, and then there are humans who for some reason find this experience really painful, and they can't wait to be out of here, which just sort of keeps them coming back. Because I do think, you
Mhm.
know, like, I don't think there's a way back to your source, or to me, it's like the highest self that exists outside of time, right? Like, I don't think there's a way back to that experience, that back to that place that doesn't include a long experience as human, right? Like, I don't, you know, so people who are like, oh, I can't wait to get out of here and go back to the other, or whatever, it doesn't work like that, right? You need to be here a long time to have the kinds of experiences necessary for that level of enlightenment, right? Like, a long time. And that highest self outside of time, that is why you're experiencing the synchronicities and the cosmic giggle or whatever, because there is a part of yourself that is there and that is controlling this whole show, right? Like, that is creating these sort of you know, bad guys for us to have to fight against, to overcome, right? Like, I have a, you know, many different lines of possibilities that I go down when I'm considering, like, what this is and why this is happening. But one of the big things that I, you know, when we're talking about things like MK Ultra or projects, like, why, like how is this happening? Okay, is this something that they're doing, or did I do this? Because, like, this whole, you know, like Sonia once said, Emily, like, you did this because you obviously needed to have that experience to propel you on to whatever the next thing was going to be. And so if you're trying to, like, let's just say that you want to go, like, there's a machine or a game, and you have to, in order to win, to achieve enlightenment, you have to enter the game or enter the machine, right? And the deal that you make with the deal when you enter the machine is that when this happens, you're going to lose your memory. right? You're not going to remember that you chose to come into this thing or whatever, right? And so like, but there's some degree of designing the game that you can do before you enter, right? Like you can create the video game and then you can become a character in it and play it, right? And so if you knew that your memory was going to be wiped, wouldn't you be setting little things for yourself, like leaving breadcrumbs on the trail, right? For you to remember your way home. And so sometimes because of the way humans are, like we have to create an experience for ourselves that is traumatic, that will sort of force us to start looking for things that if everything were smooth and easy, we wouldn't be looking for, right? Like if we didn't have challenge, like almost every single person that I have ever met, when they start to wake up, they start to wake up because something hard or bad happened in their life. They either lost a loved one, they lost a job, they got divorced or whatever, or they lost a child, or they, you know, bottomed out on drugs or something like that, right? So there was some like desperate thing going on that made them feel like there was something wrong, and it was something more than just like the experience they were having right then, right? And so like creating this scenario where there are people doing something to you so that you will figure out why. Like I think that like the whole of humanity is part of these projects. Like I don't think this is something that, oh, this person was special so we're doing it with them, like, right? Like I think they're looking at everybody for these kinds of things. Everybody is targeted. Obviously we have surveillance everywhere, you know, all that kind of stuff. And what happens is when you become aware of it, like that's when you become the quote unquote the MK or the targeted individual, because you are aware of your position now in this weird game that we're in that's like a Truman Show. But it's like, are we conducting it or is someone else doing it? And the likelihood is just as great that we are managing this entire simulation for ourselves from outside of it. And so when we have those synchronicities, when we have those cosmic giggles, it's just a reminder that like, okay, like, while this is serious and this is life, this is also just a game, and like everything is going to be okay, right? And just like anything else, like, you know, like even like issue, you know, for people who like need to have the death experience, you get another go, right? It's not over after that. Just like when you're playing video games, right? When you're playing video games, like if you have another man, or you can always put in another quarter and go again. And so like, you know, having a good balance between knowing this is important and not being so attached to the outcome all the time that we're able to sort of move through it with the giggles, appreciate the synchronicities. But, you know, at the end of the day, this is all I know for sure is this. It has something to do with frequency, resonance, and geometry. It has to do with light and sound and shapes. Like, you know, like when and I've talked about this a couple of times, I may have even mentioned this the last time we talked. Like I had this experience where I was literally watching craft come through whatever the dome that we live under is. And the way they were doing it was lining themselves up with like a particular angle of geometry on the top of the whatever we're calling the shit we're in, right? And they would come through, and then behind the ship, which behind the ship was like a trail of like little geometries. It was almost like all the little folds and shapes, like if you have like a dodecahedron or some kind of like angular, you know, hexadecadron or whatever they call them, like it's all these angles that fold in on themselves. So the ship has to do that, get themselves into this little thing to be able to come through, and then afterwards it kind of unwinds it all, and you can see all the little shapes that were sort of folded. Like there's something about, and this goes for like entities too, right? If something can line themselves up with your geometry of something, or the sound resonance or the frequency or whatever, then they're able to sort of move through, right? They're able to sort of come through. And this goes for like, you know, people need to be careful with sigils and even tattoos on their bodies and things like that, right? Like it's like a key in a door. Right? The keyhole has the geometry cut into it, and when the key that has the right geometry goes through, it can turn. So it has something to do with that, this way of accessing in, portaling in and out, you know, and it has something to do with like temporal awareness, right? Like, you know, like understanding your relationship to time. Like, you know, time simultaneously exists and doesn't exist. And I think it really is whether you're controlled by time or whether you're controlling time. I think the question is more about time control or time generation. So those are the things that I feel like I know for sure it has to do with, but I don't know. Like sometimes are we like in the middle of some like weird, silly psychedelic trip and we're all like, when you're like, I don't know if you've had psychedelic experiences, but when you're in it, everything makes sense, right? And then when it's over, like the next day or a week later, you try and explain it. It's not quite so clear, right? Like it's kind of something like that. It's like, are we in the trip or were we in the trip before and now we're out of the trip and trying to remember what it was? It's hard to say. But I know that I get more clues to what's happening when I'm enjoying the experience than when I'm angry and like trying to figure out the answer really hard,
Yeah, sometimes we want to get the final answer, and I think this is the one of the problems with science. We are trying to find the final answer with our mind, with our reasoning, with our logic, with our language, and those are all tools within the trip. So there's no way to or perhaps we can kind of see outside the trip with those tools. We can get like glimpses, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, Sonia always says you have to love this game, right? You have to love playing this game, and part of loving that game means like also there's parts of the game that aren't your favorite part, but you still love the game so much it's okay. I don't know if you ever had the experience when you were little. I was really good at video games and I liked playing them. I don't play them now, but like I used to love playing like Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, all that shit. And if you like past all the levels, you broke what would happen was the game would break. It would just like start making nonsense on the screen. There was no ever like some escape to another world and now you're the champion and you're the king and everything is glorious. No, like what happened when you finally defeated the game was frustration because you thought you were going to have some like neat celebration and instead what you got was a broken video game machine, right? And so there's something too that like, as difficult as we feel like this is, and as much as we feel like there's something on the other side we're trying to get to, like the whole thing is really about the enjoyment of the game, because like when we get to if we get to whatever it is, we just might find out that it's over, right? So like that's, don't get so obsessed with what's on the other side of the game because it may not be that interesting. This may be where it's at. There may be a reason why all of these entities want to be human because, like not having the body, not having this 3D experience that sometimes is difficult, sometimes is challenging and whatever, like it's not as fulfilling as this. And so all these other things want this.
And you will find, perhaps it will be like you were saying before, the horizon will always be receding, will always be further and further. And when you were speaking before, you reminded me of when I was younger. There were these programs like Game Create or Game Maker, something like that, where you could create like levels of like a kind of Mario kind of game, a platform, something, and you would be like creating different levels and whatever. And then I remember that I would finish it, and you could try out the levels that you created. But then I would go in and it would be no fun because I already knew all the level, and I would be like, oh yeah, I know that there is a secret passageway over here and that there is a mushroom over here or whatever. And and in part, us forgetting or creating the game beforehand and then forgetting when we come in is like the whole key of the thing, because that other game wasn't enjoyable for me because I already knew everything. Oh yeah, at the end this happens, in the middle this, and at the
yeah, I mean, and even this idea that we all engage in, and it's even something that I've obviously encouraged, of like creating our own realities. Like I think sometimes even with that, even let's say we figure out how to do it, let's say that you and I figure out how to open up a pocket to another universe, right? So if we went in and it's not one we designed, it could just be similar to this or a different version with the same kind of bullshit but a different whatever, right? Or if it's one we created, then it's the thing that you said, right? Where it might seem nice for a little bit because sometimes it does feel like, oh, this is relaxing, I don't have to worry about all this crazy shit that is not of my making. But after a while it's boring. So even with these reality creations, I don't know if that becomes a place for you to hang out permanently. Maybe it's something to go inside and to feel and experiment and see how far you can push the boundaries on something, and then ultimately choose to come back and apply those things in this space where you don't necessarily have ultimate complete control. I mean, on a certain level we do, because you have a level of control over yourself, but like, you know, it's not, there was a time when escaping this seemed really appealing to me, and it doesn't so much anymore to me. Like, I like the idea of like, okay, like I want to figure out how to world create, how to reality create, and I want to go there and I want to enjoy that, and then I want to come back here and do this some more. And when I say come back here, I don't mean I want to die and come back to life. I mean kind of like going on vacation or going travel to another country. Like, you know, you've traveled a lot, I think, different places in the world. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So when you go someplace else, it's like, wow, man, this is fucking neat. I love this. And also at a certain point, you're like ready to go home, or even if you didn't want to go home, when you get home and you go and have your mom cook you something to eat, or you go to your favorite restaurant or whatever, there's some joy in, like, even though there's a lot of issues here that aren't perfect, like this is my home and I love this. And so I think learning to have an appreciation both for that which you have that you create completely on your own, and that which you're just part of, like a larger tapestry that other people are participating in and creating as well. Like, I think like doing both, like having like diversity of experience, right? Like we hear so much about diversity and whatnot, and it's, you know, but like a diversity of experiences and appreciations for all of them, I think makes this game more fun and more playful and more expansive. And I don't think it's about eliminating one reality and going into another as much as it is expanding your awareness of all the realities and being able to move seamlessly between them, right? Like, I don't think it's one to the exclusion of the other. You know, like I think of a really powerful person as not one who's escaped the system, but one who can dance in between the reality of various systems and exist, you know, exist joyfully or have an interesting experience in all of them, you know?
There's this balance between escapism and exploration in a way, because we started perhaps in a cave and now we're in cities and we have the internet and whatever, and there's ideas of going into space, and you imagine like people or different colonies of people living on ships or living on asteroids or whatever, and in a way it's like escaping the problem that humanity is making on Earth, but at the same time it's just a natural progression perhaps of the human animal to go to expand and go out.
Space exploration is, in my opinion, nothing more and nothing less than the expansion from taking the exploration of one's own mind outside of their head, right? If you look at, like, and I talk about this all the time, but if you look at like some of the, you know, images, whether they're actually true images or whether they're just created, of what space looks like, a lot of it looks really similar to what the inside of the brain looks like. I've talked about how I think that there's a one-to-one, either there are the same thing or there's like a one-to-one connection between the secret space program and the brain mapping program, right? Like my partner has this book called Brain Stars, and it's about the glia system in your brain. She's a craniosacral therapist. And all of these little like stars in your brain and synapses and connections and stuff look exactly like the shit we see when we look at the night sky, right? So I think this desire to explore space is a natural progression from exploring one's own mind. But I think that sometimes that seems so much vast and so much greater that people have decided, you know, to skip over the exploring your mind and just go out there. And I think that's where we end up in a problematic kind of situation, right? There needs to be a balance between inner exploration and outer exploration, and that the true pathway, I read this book, like not super early on to my metaphysical awakening, called Inner Paths to Outer Space. Right. And to me, that was like a super like influential book in the way that I perceive things, and that like really the fastest path to space is not, you know, waiting for your turn on SpaceX or, you know, whatever kind of thing. It really is to go so deep inside yourself that, you know, the penetration into outer space happens like that.
Yeah. And if you think about how even scientifically, if you think about how the 3D world that our body is in, how it's created inside our minds, inside our brain, inside our head. In a way, it's exactly like you're saying. The outer world is a projection of the inside. So
Mm-hmm.
there is like a kind of a closed loop between the
Mm-hmm.
two in a way. Like if you were to go physically forward forever, at some point you will end up like at the back of
Yeah.
your own head or something like that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
going inside your own mind. And you were
Yeah.
mentioning, oh sorry, but you were
No,
mentioning before the thing about geometry,
mm-hmm.
and I connected it a bit with science and our rational mind and whatever. But it also brought to mind this dream that Descartes had, where an angel came to him and told him something like, the nature of reality is to be discovered through measurement and number. and
Mm-hmm.
and that a message is what kind of gave birth to science. But also, if we apply it to what you were saying, it shouldn't just end with science, because measurement and number, we're still talking about that when we talk about vibration and frequencies and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
which would allow for stuff that science says is impossible, with still applying the same concepts. And I just wanted to mention that.
I think that's the problem with science, is like science has really become scientism, because if we're really being scientific, nothing is actually impossible. Everything is open for discussion, right? Like this idea that the science is settled is the most unscientific idea that you can have. It's never settled. It's the most probable thing until new information comes, kind of thing, right? But yeah, no, I mean, I think all of those really early kinds of scientific thinkers had a very metaphysical nature to what they were doing, right? They were using science as a way of trying to understand the thing that seemed mystical. They weren't separating them, right? And in some cases, people were using metaphysics to try and understand something that seemed more measured or scientific or whatever. This idea that they're separate things, I think, has been part of the polarity of control. It's like you're either a religious nut or you're a science nut, and
Well,
there's no.
actually, those
Yeah.
guys were all of them religious, mostly
Yep.
Christian or Catholic, perhaps in those times, or Protestant or whatever.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think that separation that happened was just part of a number of polarities that have been created to keep people separated from themselves overall. You know what I mean? That to have to keep the right brain separate from the left brain, instead of sort of having a dance together, which is what we've been talking about the whole time here, right? Like that, be sort of equally amused by something as you are offended by it, right? Be equally, sure of something as you are still open to the things that you're not yet aware of, right? Like there's not, I think you get stuck when you commit to just one side or the other, right? Like where you're not willing to like sort of, and this isn't like about being a fence sitter and not deciding. It's more about like dancing in that middle zone. It's much more interesting. And I think that place where metaphysics and science overlap is like the most fascinating place. I mean, I actually think that there's so much going on in that space right now that is truly like on a certain level what all of these events that we're experiencing right now are designed to cover up, right? Because if you go and you look at like Drudge Report or any of these things, you see like 50 stories about the protests, and before it was 50 stories about the coronavirus, right? But at the very bottom, off where nobody really looks, you'll see something like scientists have found that there's another sun and Earth reflected in space, or they've discovered that there's a portal to another dimension in Antarctica where time runs the opposite direction, right? And like these are all areas where there's like an overlap between what we thought of as like mystical and what we have understood as scientific, right? And these things are on display right now, but nobody can see them because all the air has been sucked out of the room by coronavirus and George Floyd's protests or Black Lives Matter. And so I think that like that space right there, I mean, and that goes to kind of everything we've been talking about is like, that who am I, and being open to both possible answers or multiple possible answers for that. I don't know. People want like guarantees and assurities and, you know, like clear-cut answers, and that's just not the world that we live in. Like I think it would actually be quite boring if everything was.
Yeah, like I heard that the 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 mind wants, like you're saying, certainty,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the heart is open to live in um, in uncertainty, but even more than uncertainty, in paradox even.
Yep.
Mm.
Paradox. I mean, that is the great. I mean, that is like. Did you ever watch the TV show Fringe?
I watched a little, and you reminded me of a show that I want to mention, but go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, that was sort of the great sort of underlying the final question that was left with this great paradox of like, did Walter create this problem? Did he even ever exist? Can Peter remember him? Right? Like that. It ended with, you know, you'd have to watch the show to understand what I'm talking about. But you have this situation where a group of people who were involved in some issues and technologies that later in the future created the scenario that these beings would learn to control stuff in a way that they would come back and control the very people who possibly created them in the first place. And in order to stop what was happening now, you had to, you know, go travel into the future to repair the past. And there was this one mysterious figure. Did he ever really exist or not? Like, was it, you know, it's a paradox, right? Like, if you repair the situation, did the person who created it even ever see, you know, ever exist? And that's what we're in. It's like, I don't know that there's going to be satisfactory answers to people, you know, like if they need it to be a sure thing, right? Like, I think, you know, like, yeah, like when the game is over, it's boring,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's boring. So my, you know, advice to people is like, you know, start playing. You know what I mean? Like, there's not, part of the mind control here is that we think that there's all of these rules and all of these laws and all of this kind of stuff, right? The people that we get so offended by, they're not paying attention or playing by any of those things. And really, you don't have to either. Like, you're not out there to hurt people or take things from people or whatever. So if you want to try something, try it. You know what I mean? Like, start playing with time, start playing with reality, start flipping your perceptions on what something might be. Like, if, you know, everything is saying go this way, see what happens if you go that way. You know what I mean? Like, start just, you know, like, there's not really anything to lose by experimenting a little bit here. And for me, I've kind of found that, like, I like the adventure. You know what I mean? I would definitely, like, it's great when things can be good and interesting, but if I had to choose between good or interesting, I'd choose interesting every time.
Yeah. Mhm. So thank you. That's a great way for us to wrap up this conversation. I just wanted to mention this show that you reminded me of. I just watched it. It's 9 episodes. I think it's like a mini series. Did you watch this movie called Watchmen?
No.
Oh well, it's a pretty good movie. It's a superhero movie, but it's not like Marvel or DC where it's like action movie.
Okay.
I consider it an artistic masterpiece. It's one of those movies that kind of using the superhero thing, they go beyond that, and it's more like about how they are people with fucked up lives and with fucked up morality and philosophies or whatever, and then recently, I think last year, this show came out. It's 9 episodes. It's a mini series of Watchmen also, but it's like another situation within that universe, let's say.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I wanted to bring it up because I really liked it. It goes into all the stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And recently, even though there are some terrible shows out there, even on the subscription services, every once in a while you'll get a kind of a diamond around the place.
Yeah.
I don't know how those things get through the cracks, but they do. And yeah, I think this one is one of those. So do you
All right.
think
I'll check it out.
Fringe is that good also?
Oh, Fringe is great. Like, Fringe is like one of those ones that you just refer to it over and over and over again. You know, in some ways it's becoming a little passe technologically from where we are right now. There's other series that are more in line with what's going on now technologically. But in terms of like the big picture of like what may be happening and why, I think Fringe is pretty good. And there's just endless little topics to mine from, from watching that. And it's, it's kind of, it goes to what we've been talking about this whole time, is the person who was tested on, the person who was part of the project, ultimately is also the person who can save the world, right? And so all of these challenges that we're going through, like, the watching, the surveillance may be because they know what's coming with you, or to try and stimulate you to a greater version of yourself, and it doesn't make it okay that they're doing it or whatever, but there's an explanation, there's a better version of the story that you can sort of tell yourself to move your life from a place of victimhood to, like, to being sort of a connoisseur of the crazy experience that is life, right? And to just move you into a place where you're enjoying the game instead of you're being tricked by it, or there's something being done to you and whatnot.
Yeah, from powerless to empowered.
Yeah, you can become the hero of your own life. You don't need to be a hero for the whole world. Become the hero of your own life, write your own story, be the legend of your own mind. All that kind of stuff is totally okay, as long as you allow for everybody else to do that as well.
Yeah. Hey, Emily, this was awesome, really, once again. Please share with everybody your social links and whatever you want to share.
All right, so you can find me on the YouTube. Go to my personal YouTube channel, which is Emily Moyer. You will find all of my work there. I just started it. It serves as a backup channel for the Off Planet Media channel, but there's also some work that you will only find there, including a lot of my nutritional videos, my show Words with Danny, and the Matrix Mash with Robert Phoenix, and everything else I do as well. And then the other stuff is on Off Planet Media too. I have got several programs going right now. I'm kind of in a transition because my longtime co-host Randy Moggins, he's going off to do some other things, so I'm producing a lot of things on my own. You can find all of my work as well at patreon.com/offplanetmedia, and I'm also available for nutrition consultations, life coaching, and because so many people have been reaching out and requesting it lately, also sort of experience sessions where I can kind of help people who believe they've had some of this mind control or targeting experience move their story from a disempowered place to an empowered place. So I'm offering those sessions as well. And you can find me on Facebook at Emily Moyer, or you can email me at technobrat21@gmail.com, and I will respond. And thank you, Rafa. It's always nice to chat with you.
Cool, thank you. I like it very much too. All right, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.